Hello everyone, Ion here. Today we're going to be talking about Ash Ketchum. There's a bit of a stigma around Ash that he never catches anything, but he has a sizable amount of Pokemon honestly. So today I'm going to reveal to you Ash Ketchum's complete Pokédex. Alright, so before we start, let's go over some guidelines. Based on our knowledge from the video games, a Pokemon is registered to your Pokédex if you have caught it in any type of Pokeball. But additionally, if you're traded a Pokemon, even if just for a moment, it gets registered to your Pokédex as well. Also, just because you don't have a Pokemon anymore doesn't mean it isn't in your Pokédex. This applies to Pokemon Ash doesn't have because it was released, as well as Pokemon that he doesn't have because they evolved into something else. Also, just to add another layer to this video, I'll be adding in some trivia about these Pokemon. Alright, we're taking it in Pokédex order by series today, so let's get started with the original series. Starting us off, we have the one and only Bulbasaur that Ash caught in episode 10. Very fitting that the first Pokemon in the Pokédex also is the one to start us off. Other than Pikachu, Bulbasaur is the Pokemon that Ash has owned the longest. That fills in the number 1 slot in the Pokédex and adds 1 to our counter. Next up is Charizard. Ash caught Charmander in episode 11, it evolved into Charmeleon in episode 43, and evolved again in episode 46. Charizard is the first Pokemon in the anime to beat a legendary Pokemon, and since Charizard evolved all the way from a Charmander, that means Ash has registered number 4, number 5, and number 6 to his Pokédex. Squirtle was caught by Ash in episode 12. It was the first water type that Ash owned and he never evolved it, so it adds just 1 to the count. But Butterfree, the first Pokemon Ash released, counts for 3, since it was caught as a Caterpie and evolved into a Metapod and then into Butterfree. This one might come as a surprise, but Ash actually has a Beedrill registered to his Pokédex. He caught it in the bug catching contest, but decided to give it to Casey, making this the only Pokemon Ash ever gave away. Pidgeot was caught as a Pidgeotto, so Ash doesn't get the whole line registered, but hey, 2 is better than none. Pidgeot is the only Pokemon that Ash has had in his active team at the time of a Pokemon League conference that didn't participate in a league battle. Thanks, Team Rocket. Another slight surprise might be that Ash has Raticate registered to his Pokédex. On the St. Anne, not the SS Anne, Ash traded his Butterfree for Eradicate, which technically registered it to his Pokédex. Fortunately, he got Butterfree back though. Obviously, Ash has Pikachu, his first Pokemon registered in his Pokédex. Pikachu has defeated the most legendary Pokemon in the entire anime: Brandon's Regice, Tobias's Latios, Gladion's Silvally, and Tapu Koko. Next is Primeape, the Pokemon that Ash owned for the shortest amount of time, coming in at 4 episodes, with only 2 on-screen appearances in that time. Since Ash caught him right after he evolved, it doesn't add the Mankey slot, unfortunately. Muck, who has appeared in every series except XY, adds 1, but Kingler, the only Pokemon of Ash's to win a league match single-handedly, adds 2. In the Seeking catching contest, Ash caught a Seeking, but he had to release it under contest rules. If there was any doubt in the original series, it was basically confirmed in Journeys that Ash caught Mimey, and while most of the time it wasn't with Ash, it still adds 1 to the counter. He may have caught 30 of them, but all of Ash's Tauros only count for 1 slot, and they are the only Pokemon caught by a main character in a banned Pokemon episode. Next is Ash, Misty, and Tracy's designated Uber driver, Lapras, who Ash actually reunited with in Johto and to be a Pokemon Master, but unfortunately it didn't rejoin the team. Ash's Snorlax, who is infamously known for using 6 moves in 1 battle, adds a slot as well, and that brings us into Johto. Ash caught Chikorita towards the beginning of the Johto saga, and it evolved later on in the series, making this the only Pokemon of Ash's to evolve during his time in that region. Ash's Cyndaquil, on the other hand, was caught in Johto, but never evolved in the original series. When Ash brought it back for the Sinnoh League, however, it managed to evolve. This is the only Fire-type starter of Ash's to evolve outside of the region where it was caught. Ash's Totodile is one of only 3 Pokemon caught in an Apricorn ball. Unfortunately, it never evolved though, so it only gets 1 slot. Adding to the total of evolved bird Pokemon that Ash has caught is Ash's Noctowl, the first shiny Pokemon shown in the anime and the only one of Ash's. Heracross has the 2 most powerful bug and fighting type moves, Megahorn and Focus Punch, and it's the only Pokemon Ash caught in Johto that can't evolve. Ash hatched Phanpy in Johto, but left it at Oak's lab when he left for Hoenn. Fortunately, it rejoined his team in the Battle Frontier and evolved into Donphan. This was the longest unbroken streak of episodes where Ash had a Pokemon rejoin his team. Speaking of the Battle Frontier though, let's move on to the advanced generation. Ash caught Aipom towards the end of AG, but later traded it to Dawn in Diamond and Pearl. This means Aipom is the only Pokemon to be introduced into the series before its trainer. That being said, since Ash traded it before evolving, he only gets the Aipom slot in his Pokédex. Dialing it back a little closer to the beginning of AG, Ash's Sceptile, his only Pokemon in the anime to have evolved in 2 different regions, adds 3. Next we have Best Bird Swellow, who happens to be the first regional bird Pokemon of Ash's to be caught in its first stage. Torkoal is the only fire type and only Hoenn Pokemon of Ash's that doesn't have an evolutionary family. Speaking of evolving though, Corphish is the only Hoenn Pokemon of Ash's that can evolve but hasn't yet, and I'm glad it stayed that way. Glalie, aka the powerhouse of the Hoenn League and Ash's only remaining ice type, evolved from a Snorunt, adding 2 to the counter. Moving on to the Diamond and Pearl series, we have Ash's Torterra. This Pokemon had many great wins before it evolved into Torterra. It actually lost every battle it took part in after evolving, except against Team Rocket. At least it adds 3 though. Speaking of Sinnoh starters, the best one, Infernape, is the only Pokemon of Ash's to previously be owned by a rival, and as a Monferno was first revealed in a poster for Arceus and the Jewel of Life. Staraptor's evolution from Staravia was revealed in the very same poster. It's also the only Pokemon that Ash caught without Pikachu by his side. Ash's Buizel is the only Pokemon that Ash permanently kept on his team from a trade, and only the second one he received from a trade overall. Gible was the first Dragon-type Pokemon owned by a main character ever in the Pokemon anime, and Gliscor was the only one of Ash's Pokemon to evolve from a held item, in this case the Razorfang. It's also Ash's only cross-generational evolution, so it adds 1 from both the Johto Dex and the Sinnoh Dex. Ringing in the reboot era is Black and White, and we start with Snivy. And even though we're talking about her first, she was actually the last of the Unova starters Ash caught, which contrasted the regional grass starter being Ash's first capture in other series. Pignite was the 3rd fire-type starter of Ash's to be abandoned by its previous trainer, the other 2 being Chimchar and Charmander. It's also the 2nd fire starter of Ash's not to make it past its 2nd stage, so it only adds 2 slots. Rounding out the Unova starters is Oshawott, the first starter Pokemon not including Pikachu to be obtained from a regional professor. Next is Lumiose trainer Zach's favorite Pokemon, Ash's Unfezant, who took the shortest amount of time to reach her final stage out of Ash's other regional birds, coming in at only 66 episodes. Boldore evolved once, but not fully, because to do so, Ash would have had to trade it, making this the only Pokemon of Ash's that requires trading to evolve. Palpitoad has the lowest number of episode appearances out of all of the Pokemon Ash hasn't released, coming in at only 9 episodes. Thank God for that. Leavanny is Ash's only grass-type Pokemon that isn't a starter, but much like some of the other grass types, it adds 3. Ash messed around for about 62 episodes between Crocodile's introduction and capture, the longest of any Pokemon in the anime. Because of that, he unfortunately didn't catch Crocodile as a Sandile, but instead as a Crocorock, so it only gets 2 slots added to the total. Scraggy is the 2nd Pokemon of Ash's to hatch from an egg, and it's also the first Dark-type Pokemon to be owned by a main character. Now we're getting into XY, and the next Dark type to be owned by Ash is none other than Satoshi Gecko. Okay, I really gotta stop trying to do that. Greninja is the first fully evolved Water-type starter to ever be owned by a main character, and the first Water-type of Ash's to evolve since Krabby evolved into Kingler, a whopping 776 episodes earlier. Talonflame is the only flying type of Ash's to win a gym battle before evolving, as well as the Pokemon Ash has used in the most gym battles, other than Pikachu, coming in at 7. Hawlucha is Ash's only Kalos Pokemon that hasn't evolved, because it can't, making it the first Pokemon of Ash's that can evolve since Torkoal, who was caught 502 episodes earlier. Ash's Goodra was the first of his Pokemon in Kalos to fully evolve, the first pseudo-legendary Ash owned, and the first Dragon-type Pokemon owned by a main character that evolved under their ownership. Speaking of Dragon types though, Noivern is Ash's only member of his Kalos team that didn't participate in a gym battle, and he got shafted in the Kalos League. Did this Pokemon do anything? Suddenly we're now in Alola, and the first Pokemon Ash caught in this region was Rowlet, who is his only flying type Pokemon and Alola Pokemon that hasn't fully evolved, and yet it's clearly his strongest. Against Kukui, Ash's Litten evolved into Torracat, who is the only Torracat that has appeared in the Pokemon anime, and after it beat Incineroar, it evolved into Incineroar itself, which was the only time a Pokemon fainted right as it evolved. Ash's Lycanroc is the Pokemon that dealt the finishing blow against Gladion, crowning Ash the Alola champion, and it's also the only Dusk Lycanroc in the entire anime. Next we have a bunch of Ultra Beasts that Ash caught, and even though he sent them back into Ultra Space afterwards, they still count for his Pokédex. These Pokemon are Buzzwole, Pheromosa, and Stakataka. The other Ultra Beast that Ash had was Poipole, who was revealed to have evolved into Naganadel after it returned during the Manalo conference. Not counting temporary Pokemon, this is the first Pokemon since Totodile that Ash caught in something other than a normal Pokeball, this one naturally being a Beast Ball. Finishing out Alola is Melmetal, the only mythical Pokemon owned by a main character, the only pure Steel type owned by a main character, and the first Pokemon of Ash's other than Pikachu to use an Electric type move. And winding things down, we have the Pokemon that Ash caught in Journeys, one of those being Gengar, the first Ghost type that Ash officially owned. But before Gengar, Ash caught Dragonite, who was the first Gen 1 Pokemon to indefinitely join Ash's roster since Snorlax, a staggering 1001 episodes earlier. After those two, Ash caught Riolu, who hatched from an egg that was similarly designed to the 10K egg in Pokemon Go, and the first baby Pokemon Ash ever caught. Sirfetch'd is the only single-typed Pokemon on Ash's Journeys team, and the first regional variant he ever caught. Finally, we have Ash's Dracovish, the final Pokemon that he caught, and the last Pokemon in Ash's Pokédex. It's really strong as well, because it's the first Pokemon of Ash's that managed to defeat a regional champion's Pokemon, that being Iris's Dragonite. What an amazing writing decision. That's every single one of Ash's Pokemon, which brings us to a count of 102 Pokédex slots filled, with 25 being from the Kanto Pokédex including Gengar, Dragonite, and Farfetch'd, 11 from Johto including Aipom and Gligar, 9 from Hoenn, 14 from Sinnoh including the Lucario line, 16 from Unova, 12 from Kalos, 13 from Alola including Meltan and Melmetal, and only 2 from Galar. Honestly, this is somewhat of a bigger number than I expected, but it's not all that impressive. He only caught 9.99% of the current National Pokédex, not including anything that's yet to be revealed for the Indigo Disc. There's some iffy logic surrounding if simply lending or giving a Pokemon in the anime is considered trading, but fortunately we've seen a few instances of Pokemon that need to be evolved by trade simply evolving by being given to somebody else, most notably Misty's Politoed and Brock's Steelix. Poliwhirl evolved by holding the King's Rock, and then Misty gave it to Nurse Joy so it could heal, and when she gave it back, it evolved into Politoed. Onix was given to Forest by Brock, and while we never actually saw the evolution, a lot of people think it evolved because of Brock lending it to his brother. So in the anime, who's to say that simply utilizing another trainer's Pokemon isn't considered being your Pokemon at the moment? So that being said, this category is taking into account all the Pokemon Ash has borrowed. A quick disclaimer, wild Pokemon that Ash commanded do not fit into this category, and rental Pokemon don't count either, because in the games where you can rent Pokemon for battle facilities, they don't register to your Pokedex. We're going in general Pokedex order for this category, so we'll be skipping around different series. The first were an unknown trainers Pidgey and Rattata that Ash used in Pokemon Emergency. He swapped Pikachu for Snowy with Lily for an episode in Pokemon Sun and Moon. He used Misty's Psyduck and then commanded Keegan's Arcanine. He borrowed a Ponytub which evolved into Rapidash while he used it, adding 2. In AG, he borrowed the Dojo Master's Hitmonlee. In the same episode as Psyduck, he used Misty's Staryu. He also borrowed Akihabara's Porygon in the band episode. Ash, Brock, and Misty borrowed Hagatha's Hoot Hoot. Ash commanded Brock's Sudowoodo and Lombre at separate times. He used Dawn's Piplup once in DP and another time in Black and White. He used Clement's Luxray in XY, Dawn's Pachirisu in the same episode as Brock's Sudowoodo, and finally Serena's Pancham. This all adds only 17 Pokemon, so not that much, but honestly, if you count borrowing and or commanding a certain Pokemon as being the temporary owner, then Ash definitely has 119 Pokemon in his Pokedex. Also, it's important to note that Pokemon like the Haunter he used against Sabrina, the Larvitar he temporarily journeyed with, Rotom-Dex, Rotom-Phone, and Nebby don't count despite that Ash journeyed with each of them. They're all still considered wild Pokemon since nobody else officially caught them. So yeah, if you don't count borrowing Pokemon, then 102 is your number, which isn't a lot, but that's okay. Ash's goal isn't to catch a lot of Pokemon, it's to become one with Pokemon. So it's better for Ash personally to have a smaller amount of Pokemon that he can truly bond with and become one with on the battlefield. Even if his goal at one point was to catch them all, it isn't anymore. But my goal is for you to comment your favorite of Ash's captures and subscribe to become a part of the Ionic Bond phenomenon. See ya!